Hello, everyone. I am Cody.
And I'm Brent.
And we are the Hugonauts.
And we are rolling out the red carpet here at WorldCon 2022 for interviews with authors and content creators. Wonderful. So we're here at WorldCon with Joe and Joe Haldeman. Thank you so much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
So glad to be here.
Awesome. So there's two sort of general big things would love to talk with you guys about. First is the last time we talked, you recommended that the sort of the next book of yours that we read be Camouflage, which we did. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit. And then would also, you guys have been part of the science fiction community for a long time and a big part of these conventions. So I'd love to ask you about some questions about that as well.
As well as we can remember. Sometimes 50 years ago, man, it's hard to get back there.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so let's start with Camouflage, which for those who haven't read it, won the Nebula in 2005 and is generally about a couple of aliens on Earth who can take any shape they want and are very smart. And it was a really great book. Thank you for the recommendation.
Well, thank you.
It was very fun to read. Really, it was like a page turner. It had been a while since I'd read one like that. It was great. But yeah, so the book, like a number of your others, a lot of the characters are academics with really advanced degrees, and of course, you spent a lot of your life teaching in higher education as well. Yeah. And that's true in your other books as well. Just a lot of characters, a lot of advanced degrees. And so I was wondering if you could talk about just kind of like what attracts you to academia. What do you like about it? Because it does seem like something you like.
Well, partly it's because of my various interests, astronomy, philosophy, literary criticism, and so forth. You don't get too much hanging around in bars. You've got to almost have to go to universities. Although there's something to be said about hanging around the right bars.
The ones next to universities are good.
Yeah, generally. But not always. I've learned a lot going to certain watering holes like Key West, and the left bank. And if you really want to get stuff to talk about when you're in literary context, you go outside, quite slightly outside of literary places.
Yeah. Well, on that note, reading the book, I haven't been to Samoa, but it sure felt like you had. Did you go to do research for the book?
I've been to Samoa. Was that before or after I wrote it?
Before you wrote it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
It was inspiration, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think, when I was a kid, I read Coming of Age in Samoa. The primary but very flawed resource for writing about white people in Samoa. And of course the problem is in the subtitle, White People in Samoa. I mean, what the fuck do they know? So, I loved Samoa. I loved from our point of view, we say, well, we love the simplicity of their life. Their life is not at all simple. But viewed from a Western prism, it seems simple because what you can perceive of it is simplified. But living as an actual person born in Samoa, coping with life in Samoa, is a lot harder than life in Bethesda or something.
Yeah. Interesting. There was another section of the book that felt like that, really small. Just one of the characters sort of mentioned in passing that they had met Arthur C. Clarke at an Apollo launch in the 70s, and it sounded like that might have been something that happened in your life. Is that the case?
Yes, indeed. I knew Arthur in a science fictional context before we met at the launch. But at the launch, it was very interesting. And this is, I don't know whether the text that you read referred to this, but Arthur and I were two of the very few people who smoked there. And so he and I were always hanging out on the porch where we could smoke.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we had a similar background. Arthur and I come from not just science fiction, but from amateur astronomy. And so we had zillions of things to talk about. Not to mention knowing all the people and having gossip to share.
Yeah. What was he like? Did you like him?
I loved him. He's
Yeah.
a wonderful man.
Yeah.
And just a great listener,
Okay.
which is not that common in
Nope.
famous people. But he's just a charming dude. It's there are aspects of his life that are rather unusual, which gives you something to talk about. But yeah, I mean, I could sit with Arthur for days and not repeat
Yeah.
him or me, not repeat ourselves.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that he was like a fun, interesting person. You never, you can never tell from someone's writing.
You never know.
Yeah. And actually, on that note, I'm going to come back to Camouflage, actually, but you've reminded me of something. I would love to. You guys have been part of science fiction for a long time, so maybe this is a good one for you, Gay. Is there any author who, on the page they sort of seem like dry and very serious, but in fact they're like very fun at the parties?
Oh my goodness.
I'm trying to think of an author who is boring on the page, who I kept reading beyond that page. Well, there are people who are more interesting on the page than they are in person.
Okay.
But that means they're good,
Right.
Because I hope that I'm more interesting on the page than I am in person. Because, you got to invent something. Because in person, I never invent anything except to, stay off the police blotter and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't think of any authors I would say that about. Most of the good writers are also good conversationalists.
Yeah.
And some of them are quite a bit funnier than they are on the page. Gene Wolfe was great company, and his work is heavy, some of it.
Yeah.
Great stuff, but he was different in person.
Interesting. I like that. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right, so back to Camouflage for a minute. A big section of this book was set in the Bataan Death March in the Philippines, which, as a casual observer of history, I was aware that the U.S. forces in the Philippines had surrendered at the beginning of the war. I knew the war in the Pacific was brutal, but nevertheless, that whole section was incredibly tough and eye-opening. How did you... I guess, what made you want to put that in, and what research did you do to be able to put together something that felt so real?
Well, this will reveal too much, but I had just read a book about it, so wow, so it was fresh in my mind. And then also, it's a thing that's slightly esoteric, but very easy to do research on. And so there are a lot of works of fiction that have bits about the war in the Philippines and the Bataan Death March and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because that's the sort of thing freelance writers are just looking for, details,
Yep.
human interest stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm guilty. It's in a way, it may be mental laziness because, if you're really ambitious, you could do the same level of detail about the French-American War and go, I was there.
Well, I felt it refreshing because that's something that, I don't know. I think for a lot of readers, part of what we look for, fiction's supposed to entertain, right? But it can teach us something along the way too. It's wonderful, and it felt like such a great way to do both, and I felt like I opened my eyes. So anyway, thank you for doing it, even if it was a cheat.
Yeah, well, if you're a science fiction reader, you read partly to gather information.
Yeah.
I mean, you got into science fiction partly out of a curiosity about science and the so-called real world, and kind of figuring out what is real and what isn't real. That's partly what science fiction readers do.
Yeah, absolutely. So one last question about, this is actually sort of about books in general, but it sparked my meridian of Camouflage. I'm really curious what happens to a book between editions and between printings. And who basically is in charge of the copy, because they do change a little bit, right? And so if there's going to be a second, a third edition, a fourth printing, who is it that is in charge of the text between those? Is the second publisher just picking up what was in the first and then they start a new editing process, or how does all that work?
By and large, it's a very junior editor.
Okay.
Because it's not the sort of editing job that somebody really is hungering after doing.
Yep.
And if an author is lucky, they'll get somebody who's conscientious about it and enthusiastic about it just for the job's sake. Now, I'm in their camp because I love that part of writing. And it doesn't have to be my book. I love sitting down and doing the copy editing and doing the rewriting, that sort of thing, because I love books as objects. Yeah, a book about Brazilian weaving is pretty boring to me, but the book itself is interesting.
Yeah.
And has its own, physical challenges. How was it made? What troubles did they have turning it into an actual book? That sort of thing is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then, yes, absolutely.
Sometimes the books change between the paperback and the hardcover because the author finds something they want to change.
Ah, okay.
There are several versions, I hate to say it, of the Forever War because Joe wanted to change something. There are 2 versions of War Year, his first novel, because the original editor wouldn't let him kill off the character in the last part of the book. So when it came out in paperback, he was able to change a few things.
Oh, that's interesting. So on that note, I guess what, and it's good to hear that you want to make changes. Okay, so every once in a while, as a reader, when you're reading something, you find a typo in a book, and it's always like, oh my gosh, how did the first thought is how did this happen? Which of course, then once you try to actually write or edit a book, you understand how that could happen.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, if a reader really wanted to be a little bit extra and notice something, and they want to help that next editor out, who should they contact, or should they just let that go? Is there no way to be helpful, or is it just a pain?
Well, you could do worse than writing the author.
Yeah?
Then the author can tell the editor.
Okay.
The author would know which editor actually has power over the text, because many editors don't, especially after a book has gone past its first printing. I mean, what are you going to do? Go... Some fanatic writers chase down every sold copy and say, I want to change page 52, and all right.
Yep.
But
okay.
no, I understand a book is a kinetic changing thing. And 50 years after a book was written, the author's original intent becomes moot, actually. I mean, who cares? Academics care. But as long as the book holds together, yeah, it's a book. Go get another book.
I love that. All right, well, so let's talk about conventions a little bit. I mean, here we are in the middle of one. You just finished signing. What is the first convention that you guys can remember going to?
Can I talk about that? 1963, DisCon.
Okay.
In Washington, D.C. We were teenagers. We were dating. Joe saw it in Analog magazine. And so we gathered a bunch of friends and went down to the convention. It was wonderful.
Yeah?
Yep.
And I had a huge piece of luck, because the first day I went down at 9 in the morning. I didn't know anything about conventions. So here's this vast, huge convention floor. And the only other person who was up was John W. Campbell. And so I just started talking to him.
The editor of Analog
Yeah,
magazine.
he has a huge award named after him still, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. But at the time, he was one of the 2 or 3 most powerful people in science fiction. I didn't know that. He was an old guy who was smoking, and I wanted to smoke too. So we just sat and smoked together for like more than an hour. And then I thought, God, I've heard of this guy's name. And after he died, the guy who took over, Ben Bova, became editor of Analog, and he found this correspondence between Campbell and me about this science fiction war novel. And John wound up not being able to publish it. But Ben wrote me and said, hey, could I take a look at that? And so he did the first magazine version of the Forever War.
Yeah.
Which was a huge help for me. A lot of exposure in what was the biggest science fiction magazine of the day.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. It paid off.
Yeah. But, it wasn't something that I planned to do. It wasn't a strategy on my part. It was just, I kind of knock around and I run into the right people.
There you go. Hey, I mean, that's a big part of life.
We've had a lot of luck that way. But we were talking about conventions.
Oh, yeah, right.
and the first one was DisCon, and we've been to more than 50 WorldCons now.
Oh my gosh.
Somebody was just adding it up for me. I think we're up to 55, but I'm not sure. We've missed a few, but not many since then.
That's amazing. Are there any, with so many, this might be an overwhelming question, but any particularly good or funny stories that come to mind from conventions past?
A good story. Well, there was a time that... No, ask me about a particular writer, and I can tell you,
Story about him, probably.
Okay. You got any good Philip K. Dick stories for us?
Yes. Well, I don't know whether it's good or not, but the first time I met Philip K. Dick, we were out in California at a WorldCon. So I walk into this room, and there's Philip K. Dick sitting alone in a chair.
Just in the middle of... Okay.
Yeah. Well, he was a very difficult person,
Okay.
but I thought I'd go up and say hello. So I did, and we talked for an hour and a half. Because he was just waiting for somebody to talk to, and there I was.
That's great.
That kind of thing has happened a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, interesting.
We
Okay.
once had Robert Bloch at a convention, and people were scared to talk. He was sitting at a party, and nobody was talking to him.
Yeah.
So, of course, I went up to him, and we met him and asked him how he was doing and everything, and then people started coming over. So we try not to leave people hanging out in the middle of nowhere like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, and then I would also... Oh, you guys just might know the answer to this. So this was our first convention, and there's this party sign that is very beat up, and it's a place that people can, put a room number that they're going to have a party in later that night.
Yeah.
And on it, it looks decrepit. It looks terrible. And on it says "Filthy Pierre."
Oh, yeah.
What is the deal with this sign?
Filthy Pierre has been around conventions as long as we have. He's here. He's
Filthy Pierre is a person.
oh yeah, he's a person.
Okay.
And he does this at brings out not just the party sign, but he advertises conventions. He has a column in Asimov's or Analog where he talks about conventions and gives you the details of what's coming up. He's a fan. He plays a weird keyboard instrument that he blows through and plays old tunes and sits in the hall and does that. He's an interesting man, and he's been a big help with his freebie. He has a freebie thing, and he has a
He runs the freebie thing too.
Freebie thing is his too.
Okay.
Yeah, he's quite something.
Amazing. That's great. That's a great...
And he has
Yeah.
a real name that is not Filthy or Pierre.
Which just went out of my head.
I can't think of it.
Well, it sounds like he's been marketing himself as Filthy Pierre for a
Yeah,
long time, so
true.
it's working.
Right.
Okay. I would also... So this year, in any category, what was your favorite vote to cast for this year's Hugos? What were you most excited to vote for?
My favorite what?
To cast for the Hugonauts.
And in any of the
Oh.
categories. Doesn't have to be best novel, short story, anything. Just anything that you really were excited to vote for.
I should know I'm going to be interviewed at the WorldCon, so I should know the names of books and people and so forth. But it is my
You're killing
nature.
it.
It's my nature to forget the names of books and people.
We did. We're very fond of the Coode Street podcast that's up
Yes.
for a Hugo. Jonathan
We
Strawn.
talked with him on the first day. Yeah, he's so
Gary
fun
Wolf.
and great.
They're
Yes.
both terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had actually, I'll ask you one other, do you have any good Robert Silverberg stories? He's a name that's come up a lot over the course of the convention.
Have you heard the thing that Ginger Buchanan said many years ago? Bob is so sophisticated that he's never done anything for the first time.
Yeah.
That's Bob. Bob is a good friend of ours.
Yeah.
And we love spending time with him when we can.
Yeah.
Do I have any other Robert Silverberg stories?
Well, one of my Silverberg impressions is we were at a Washington convention, which was not a world con, it was just a local con, and somebody had a stack of paperbacks like that big, and I was supposed to watch out for Bob and grab him so he could sign those books, and so I grabbed him, and the look on his face was just absolute weariness.
You're giving him
Not
20 books
again.
to sign?
Yeah. please. I know exactly how he feels now. Oh, sure, I'll sign these. And I'll smile, too.
Yeah.
He was the guest of honor at a Washington convention.
Yeah.
And we went to the desk and we were trying to explain what was going to happen. It's a science fiction convention. People are going to dress up. There may be some strange stuff. None of them are dangerous. It's all fine. And the guy behind the counter grinned and he pulled out a stack of Silverberg books. Yeah. And he said, I'm just waiting for Mr. Silverberg to check in.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. All right. Well, it's been so great seeing you guys again. Thank you for talking with us as always. And I hope you have a wonderful time here at the convention.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have fun yourselves.
Thank you. We will.